Hello, my name is Abraham Rodriguez, and I will be presenting an appeal to the American people. We are your people too. A little bit about me is that I was born and raised on the island of Puerto Rico. I moved here to Maryland in February 2018 after Hurricane Maria. And if you have never seen a map of the island of Puerto Rico, I made sure to add one at the top right corner of the slide. And the bottom right corner of the slide has a flag of Puerto Rico, which we are so proud of. So why did I choose this project? It has been 4 years since Hurricane Maria, a disaster that struck the island of Puerto Rico and left my people hanging by a thread. In the aftermath of the hurricane, many of us asked, the United States will help us, right? Aren't we Americans too? These questions that were filled with uncertainty and sorrow reflect the sad history that the island has been put through. So the focus of this presentation is the Foraker Act of 1900, the Jones-Shafroth Act of 1917, the Merchant Marine Act of 1920, and a current event, which is Hurricane Maria that happened in 2017. So the Foraker Act of 1900 and its issues. It provided revenues through tariffs for the American government. And this was not subtle, by the way. If you open up the law, you will see that the first several sections of this act are actually going down into business before it actually provides a civil government for Puerto Rico. And yes, this is misspelled purposely. A lot of mainlanders could not pronounce Puerto Rico, so they just decided to change the name. And this error actually persisted until like 1952. It also provided Puerto Rican citizenship to Puerto Ricans. And this is a very heavily debated topic because, well, one of the people that I like the most in regards to this is actually Sam Ehrman's Almost Citizen book, because he argues that the U.S. government managed to circumvent the Reconstruction Amendments by creating this new citizenship. You see, because Americans aren't the same as these islanders. So if we create another citizenship for them, they won't have all the same protections as Americans will have. Another thing that the Foraker Act did was change the currency from the peso to the dollar, which destroyed the Puerto Rican economy, because this had just happened right after Hurricane San Ciriaco, which destroyed most of the crops on the island. So not only were a lot of Puerto Ricans unemployed, they were also broke after this change. There was also a forcible change of the language. However, this did not last long because Puerto Ricans are very stubborn. And so we managed to keep our language, which was Spanish. It also created the position of resident commissioner. And this is a very infamous position in Puerto Rican politics because the resident commissioner is a voteless voice in Congress. They can speak on all matters that they would like. However, they don't get a vote. So a lot of times Congress just ignores them. Now, this last one is extremely important. Congress supremacy and oversight is weaved into every single one of these laws. Essentially, Congress will always have the final say on these big matters regarding the island of Puerto Rico. This leads us to the Jones-Shafroth Act of 1917 and its issues. It is important to note that between 1901 and 1917, 21 bills were presented to Congress to grant Puerto Ricans American citizenship. And in 1917, they were finally granted American citizenship. However, this is very controversial, and it never sat right with Puerto Ricans because they gave us American citizenship very close to the World War I drafting. It also provided a Bill of Rights. It provided revisions to the previous form of government placed by the Foraker Act, and it made the resident commissioner position and now an elected position by the people of Puerto Rico. However, that congressional supremacy and oversight was actually reinforced in the Jones Act. You see, they didn't change that part where it said that Congress would have that final say over the big matters of the island. So essentially, they provided a Bill of Rights that they could have easily superseded had they want to. And the resident commissioner, even though they were now elected by the island, it didn't really matter because they didn't change the part where they are a voteless voice. And this quote, I left this quote in here because it best explains what the Jones Act of 1917 did. By extending citizenship, the U.S. Congress strengthened, politically and legally, its position in Puerto Rico without having to incorporate the island. Now it was not governing the citizens of Puerto Rico, but the citizens of the United States in Puerto Rico. And I added that emphasis because it is critical to understand the relationship between Puerto Rico and the United States. So this leads us to the Merchant Marine Act of 1920 and its issues. And the Merchant Marine Act is a big monster in and out of itself. And the Cato Institute has done a lot of investigations, a lot of forums that explains the holistic picture of this law. But as it pertains to my presentation, so it impacts the economy of Puerto Rico. However, it also affects other territories such as Guam, the U.S. Virgin Islands, Hawaii, which is a state, and Alaska, which is a state. One of the sections of this act prohibits Puerto Rico from having its own shipping industry. It creates rules on foreign trades, meaning foreign ships cannot enter ports on the island or any of the above mentioned. Now, I put foreign in quotations in this presentation because any ship that isn't flagged as a U.S. ship is considered a foreign ship. This act also created tariffs and rules on goods and dues. It protects certain investment assets for the American economy. Now, I put American in there because I just stated in 1917, we are now American citizens. So what American economy are they protecting? Now, I really have to give an example so that you can see how this act actually works. Let's say that Puerto Rico wants to do trade with a nearing country. Now, it would make sense if, let's say that they are Colombia or Dominican Republic. It would make sense that they would just go to Puerto Rico and do the trade. However, they cannot because we are prohibited from having our own shipping industry. So essentially, that ship has to go to the nearest U.S. flag port, which is actually in Jacksonville, Florida. And that ship goes into Jacksonville, Florida, unloads onto a U.S. marked vessel, and that U.S. marked vessel can finally go back to Puerto Rico. And the cost of sustaining this act makes all goods that come into the island cost about 15 to 20% more. I always tell the example to people, how much are you willing to spend per gallon of milk? So a gallon of milk, 2% milk here in Maryland may cost about $2.50. In Puerto Rico, that same gallon of milk will cost you about $6. So how do we tie this all in? So I'm going to utilize Hurricane Maria. Hurricane Maria was a Category 5 hurricane. The official death toll was 2,995. People who were on the island during the hurricane suffered months without electricity or water, and for some municipalities, it was over a year. Massive flooding all over the island, including highly elevated areas. And then, of course, millions of dollars worth of property damages. So what was the aftermath of the hurricane? So the Trump administration transformed it into an us versus them mentality. So essentially, every single time Trump got on a podium, he would always say, Puerto Rico, you threw our budget out of whack, disregarding the fact that we are also Americans, and I thought we were all in this together. The next thing, this leads into the unequal treatment with the FEMA aid. There is an outstanding Politico investigation. It's a 20-page article where it compares Texas during Hurricane Harvey and Puerto Rico during Hurricane Maria. And one of the biggest things that comes out of this investigation is that in 9 days, Texas was able to secure $141 million. Granted, Texas is huge. However, in those same 9 days, Puerto Rico was only able to secure $6 million. Now, why was that? Is because Texas actually has representation in Congress. As I have presented here, all of these laws, we only have a resident commissioner who is a voteless voice in Congress who they could speak on any matters, but they had no voting. So we had no real representation. And then not only that, in addition to this, we also had the Merchant Marine Act. I always tell people we didn't really receive aids from all those cargo ships until a month and a half after Hurricane Maria. And I tell them, you could have gone to San Juan. You could have gotten on a rooftop. You could have sat down and look at the horizon, and you could see all of those ships filled with aid for the island. All those foreign ships that are not able to enter our port because they were not U.S. flag ships. It wasn't until the unwilling repeal of the Jones Act by the Trump administration that we were finally able to get some aid. But 10 days was not enough. And then lastly, there was a report filed by the Department of Housing and Urban Development. There's a 40-page report that the Washington Post just released a few weeks back, where it details the bureaucratic processes that the American government went through in order to deny $20 million worth of federal aid in that first month after Hurricane Maria. So this leaves us with, what do we want? Essentially, we want to be recognized. We want people to know that we are also American citizens, that we have been fighting wars since World War I. We have been here from the start. Well, not the very start, but, since we were acquired. We want people to understand the very difficult situation that the island is in. We want people to understand that we are Americans too. Americans died in Puerto Rico. And lastly, we want representation. Texas was able to accomplish the things that they accomplished because of that representation. Those votes in Congress. We need that. Here's my list of sources. And I would love to continue expanding this list of sources because a lot of new sources have come out, like that HUD report. So thank you so much for your attention. And I leave my email here because if you were moved by my presentation and you want to know more, my capstone touches on a lot more historical context, and I actually explain one more law. So if you want to know more about this topic, please email me and I can send you my capstone so that you can read it. Again, thank you so much, and have a nice day.